Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Zahara's head was pounding as though 1,000 drummers had gathered for a festival inside her skull. It was early morning, and she felt an intrusive beam of sunlight cutting across her eyes from the open window. Slowly, she cracked her lids open, noticing that the curtains in her tiny apartment were different, sleek, heavier, more luxurious. This wasn't her apartment at all. The walls, painted in a deep shade of gray, surrounded furniture that screamed sophistication and wealth. Confusion coursed through her veins, displacing the lingering warmth of sleep. She turned, only to be startled by the sight of a man's broad shoulders next to her on the bed. Her heart slammed against her chest, and her immediate, disbelieving question was, "Who is this and where am I?" Fragments of last night's events flickered across her mind. Loud music at the Flamingo Club, a few close friends, and more cocktails than she had intended. Zahara remembered that her plan had been straightforward: attend a friend's farewell party for just a couple of hours, keep it classy, and return home to rest before her job interview in the morning. However, reality had strayed far from that simple plan. Now, as she slid off the bed in a frantic bid to gather her clothes, the faint glint of a ring on her finger caught her eye. Confusion quickly turned into panic. A wedding ring? Zahara froze, holding her left hand in front of her as though it were a venomous snake poised to strike. She rubbed her eyes, willing the ring to disappear. But it remained, cool and metallic against her skin. She rushed to the ornate, full-length mirror across the bedroom, something out of a glossy lifestyle magazine, and stared at her reflection. Her makeup was slightly smeared, her short hair was tousled, and she certainly looked like she had danced with abandon. Yet the ring was the one glaring element of her appearance that she simply couldn't ignore. Who had put it there? Suddenly, the man in the bed stirred, rolling onto his back. Zahara glimpsed his face: chiseled jaw, smooth dark skin, eyebrows that naturally arched as though sculpted with attention. He was handsome in an almost intimidating way. In her hazy, hungover state, Zahara recognized him, though it took her a moment to place him. He was the CEO of Crescent Technologies, a rising tech company in the heart of Lagos. His name, if memory served her correctly, was Tade Okonjo. She had seen him countless times in business magazines and on television segments about African business moguls bringing innovation to the continent. But why on earth is he here, next to me in this bed? Her pulse thundered in her ears as Tade blinked awake. His confusion mirrored hers for an instant before his eyes locked onto the ring on his own finger. Zahara's heart raced. He's wearing a ring too. There was a short, tense silence that felt like the calm before a storm, and the tension was too thick to slice with any knife. Tade sat up, pressing a hand to his temple. He looked around the room, the confusion evident in his dark eyes, and then looked at Zahara again. "I must still be dreaming," he murmured in a resonant voice. "Because this makes no sense." Zahara found her voice amidst the swirl of questions. I agree." "Did we?" She pointed between them, then to the rings. Her words stuck in her throat, refusing to form properly. Tade exhaled, wiping a sheen of sweat off his brow. "Let's not panic," he said, although his own eyes darted around the room, betraying his growing worry. "Maybe we can piece together what happened last night?" Zahara shot him a flustered look. Piece it together? I don't even know how I got here." She thought of her phone. If only she could find it, maybe the pictures or messages would provide some clarity. She crouched next to the bed, fishing for her clutch purse. She found it tossed to the side, half open with her lipstick rolling out. "Where's my phone?" She rummaged inside, her movements frenetic. When her phone finally emerged, the screen was cracked, as though it had been dropped from a height. She prayed it was still functional. Switching it on, she noticed a barrage of missed calls and messages from her close friend Tenny. As Zahara scrolled, her eyes nearly popped at the sight of a few photos from the previous night. Her usually cautious self was nowhere to be found in these images. Instead, the pictures showed Zahara with Tade, both laughing wildly, arms around each other. One photo, in particular, showcased them at what appeared to be a small altar inside the Flamingo Club's notorious Vegas-style wedding booth, a theatrical add-on that the club had introduced to stand out in the nightlife scene. The final detail, both were beaming at the camera, wearing the very same rings that still gleamed on their fingers. She stared at the photos in shock. A mock wedding booth? This can't be a real marriage, right? She thought. But something about Tade's sudden expression as he too stared at his phone told her that this wasn't merely a drunken joke. He glanced up from a digital PDF copy of something official-looking on his screen. "This is a legal certificate, Zahara," Tade whispered, voice tight with disbelief. "We're not only married in the eyes of a cheesy club act, we're legally registered as husband and wife." A hollow sensation bloomed in Zahara's stomach. She sank down onto the plush duvet, the weight of this revelation pressing her down. It was as if the entire room tilted, making her dizzy. She cast one desperate glance around, half hoping she would wake up from this hangover nightmare. But the opulent surroundings remained. Tade's ring finger still flaunted a band matching hers, and the certificate in his phone was undeniable evidence. Zahara had fantasized about marriage once, but certainly not like this, drunk, disoriented, and with someone who was practically a stranger. "Zahara," Tade began, snapping her out of her daze. He was struggling to maintain composure, running a hand through his neatly trimmed hair. "We have to figure this out. We need to speak to the manager or something at Flamingo, see how any of this could be real. Maybe it's just a glitch, or some staff member messed up the official paperwork." But Zahara found no solace in that. She stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "What if we can't just make it go away? Lagos law doesn't look kindly on tampering with official documents, Tade. We could be in serious trouble. We need to be sure it's even possible to undo this. And beyond the legalities," she hesitated, glancing at the ring on her finger. "How do we even begin to explain this to family and friends?" Tade nodded. It was clear from his expression that he was still grappling with the enormity of their predicament. He had built a reputation as a shrewd, disciplined CEO, especially in the fast-paced African tech scene. Reports often praised his drive to see local innovation rival global standards. That the tabloids would pounce on a scandalous, spur-of-the-moment wedding was evident. He loathed the idea, and Zahara could sense he was already calculating potential damage control strategies. Yet the more Zahara tried to think of solutions, the more helpless she felt. Memories from the night before refused to assemble into a coherent sequence, leaving behind only disjointed images, dancing lights, the swirl of upbeat Afropop music, the sweet burn of multiple tequila shots, Tade's warm smile. She swallowed hard, forcing her thoughts to refocus. "We can't solve anything if we don't confirm the facts," she said softly, feeling both anxious and oddly protective of her own dignity. "Let's start by gathering information, verifying this marriage certificate, and seeing if there's a way out." Tade rose to his feet, his tall frame towering over Zahara. Despite the dire circumstances, she couldn't help noticing how he exuded an air of calm command. "Right? We should do that." He paused, scanning the lavish bedroom. "But before we leave, you might want to freshen up. You're welcome to use the bathroom." His tone was gentlemanly, indicative of the polished upbringing he must have had. Zahara nodded. "Thanks," she murmured. She turned toward the adjoining bathroom, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Barely an hour into her day, and she had discovered she was married, legally, to the formidable CEO, Tade Okonjo. How quickly life could change in the hustle and bustle of modern African city life. Little did she know, this was only the first chapter of a twisted new reality that would upend everything she'd thought she knew about herself, love, and the lengths to which fate could intervene in a person's well-laid plans. Hours later, Zahara sat in the plush lobby of the Flamingo Club, a place she had once seen only in flashes of neon lights and a swirl of dancing bodies. Now, in the sober light of day, the club was a curious blend of over-the-top decor and strategic branding aimed at the city's young elite. The large space boasted intricate graffiti on the walls, pulsating LED lighting that changed color with the press of a button, and a central bar shaped like a giant flamingo's head. At the far end, a hall was roped off, the VIP area where celebrities, foreign guests, and high-profile individuals like Tade would normally lounge. Zahara shifted on the comfortable couch, her gaze darting from Tade to the manager's office door. Tade was pacing near the glass window overlooking the club's now empty dance floor. His crisp white shirt set off his dark complexion, and though he looked every bit the commanding so, the lines of tension around his eyes betrayed his distress. The manager had insisted on verifying the documents privately, so Tade had handed them over. Now they waited. "Would you like a glass of water?" Tade offered, pausing in his pacing. His attempt at courtesy only heightened the sense that both of them were tiptoeing through a bizarre scenario. She nodded. "Yes, please." Her throat felt parched, and the dryness extended to her spirit. 1,000 questions whipped through her mind. Had they seriously filed a marriage certificate? Had a drunken night led them into something that the state recognized as a binding legal union? The manager emerged from the office, a lean man in a tailored suit with a flamboyant pink tie that matched the club's theme. A shiny nameplate identified him as Kola. His uneasy expression foreshadowed what Zahara suspected he might say. Kola cleared his throat. "Mr. Okonjo." Mrs. Okonjo." He paused, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment as he realized he was addressing Zahara with a married title. "Please, come into my office." Reluctant but determined, Zahara rose from the couch, following Tade and Kola into the manager's office. It was a small space bursting with promotional posters for upcoming events featuring Afrobeats superstars. Kola closed the door, stepping around to sit behind a wide mahogany desk. Tade and Zahara took the 2 seats in front of him, exchanging anxious glances. Kola folded his hands, exhaling. "The documents you provided are authentic?" He slid them across the desk. "Legally binding. It seems the officiant you hired was certified, and the forms were indeed filed with the local registry. The Flamingo Club does offer what we call a Vegas-style wedding package, but it usually requires special disclaimers that it's purely for entertainment. However," he winced, "the 2 of you apparently insisted on the real deal last night, signing all the necessary papers. We had a mobile commissioner of oaths on site, an actual local government official. We verified the entire process with your signatures, witnesses, and the presence of a recognized officiant. I'm sorry, but the marriage is valid." For a fleeting moment, Zahara felt her vision blur. Valid? The walls seemed to close in, and she had to remind herself to breathe. Tade leaned forward, jaw clenched. "Can you confirm the identities of the witnesses and officiant?" Kola nodded, tapping the documents. "Yes. Several staff members saw you too, but more importantly, you provided 2 witnesses, your friend Tenny for Ms. Zahara, and for Mr. Okonjo, it seems an acquaintance named Obinna, who was present at the party. We also have official CCTV footage. It's all quite conclusive." He shrugged helplessly, like a man forced to deliver disastrous news. Zahara felt the urge to sink lower into her chair. The mention of Tenny came like a jolt. Tenny was one of her best friends, but also someone who sometimes encouraged her to let loose. Zahara never imagined her friend would sign something so monumental without ensuring Zahara knew what she was doing. Then again, Tenny herself may have been under the influence, or perhaps she assumed Zahara and Tade were genuinely in love. The scenario was too tangled to unravel easily. Beside her, Tade folded his arms. "And there's no immediate way to annul this on the grounds of intoxication or lack of mental capacity?" Kola shook his head. "Not easily. You'd have to petition the courts, gather evidence, and it might still take time. Even then, no guarantee. I'd suggest consulting a lawyer, a good one, if you want a quick resolution." Tade thanked the manager, albeit tersely. Once they left the office, Zahara and Tade found themselves standing outside the Flamingo Club, the Lagos sun bearing down on them. The midday heat wrapped them in a humid embrace, intensifying the weight of their predicament. Taxi cabs and danfos rattled down the busy street, blaring horns at the traffic that never seemed to ease. Pedestrians, hawkers, and corporate types milled about in that frenzied dance typical of the city's energy. Life went on around them, seemingly oblivious to the life-altering news that had just been handed to them. Zahara stared at the cracked screen of her phone again, noticing missed calls from Tenny. She wanted to march straight to her friend and demand an explanation. But first, she needed to breathe. She glanced at Tade, who was scanning something on his own phone, likely scheduling an urgent meeting with his legal team. Her thoughts turned to how this scenario might destroy her budding career prospects. She'd come to Lagos for that job interview this morning, which she had obviously missed. A pang of disappointment gripped her chest. My entire life could change because of this fiasco. They're asking me to come in for a media appearance, Tade muttered, still reading off his phone. I cancelled earlier because I was, well, obviously occupied. He let out a humorless laugh, turning to Zahara. This is going to be scandalous if it leaks to the press. I need to control the narrative. Scandalous? Zahara echoed bitterly, folding her arms. You think I want this either? Gossip sites will have a field day with the story of a broke, job-hunting woman hooking a rich CEO in one drunken night. Her voice cracked slightly, but she swallowed the lump in her throat. Tade looked remorseful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insinuate that you want to exploit this. But you have to understand I have a public image to maintain. Investors, shareholders, the boards of the companies we partner with, this fiasco could be detrimental to my brand. To our brand, now, whether we like it or not. A tense silence followed, broken only by the honking of cars and the chatter of passers-by. Finally, Zahara spoke, forcing herself to stay calm. What do you propose we do? Tade glanced around, gesturing toward the black SUV waiting a few meters away, likely one of his corporate drivers. We need more information, he said in a measured tone, and we need expert advice. Let's speak to my lawyer first. Then, if necessary, we talk to a PR consultant. If we can quietly annul this or settle it without raising eyebrows, that would be ideal. Zahara nodded, though every fiber of her being felt exhausted. The day had begun with a hangover and a shock. It continued with a trip to the Flamingo Club and concluded that they were, indeed, legally bound. She could only imagine how the rest of the day would unfold. Would she have to move in with Tade until the mess was sorted? The thought made her stomach lurch. The very idea of living under the same roof as a man she barely knew, albeit a man she was married to on paper, made her uneasy. At Tade's gentle nudge, Zahara followed him to the waiting SUV. A uniformed driver opened the door, greeting Tade respectfully. They slid into the plush back seat, and a wave of air conditioning washed over them. Tade gave the driver an address, a law firm in Victoria Island. Zahara recognized the name as one of the top legal outfits in the entire city. As the SUV joined the bustle of Lagos traffic, Zahara stared out the tinted window, her mind swirling with everything that was happening. Street vendors jostled for attention, selling everything from roasted plantains to phone chargers and newspapers. A group of young men in corporate suits hurried along the sidewalk, laptops slung over their shoulders. Billboards advertised the latest Nollywood blockbusters and Afrobeat concerts, reflecting the vibrancy of a city always on the move. Yet within the microcosm of this car, Zahara's world felt frozen in uncertainty. Tade's phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. He picked it up swiftly, his tone low and serious as he spoke. Zahara only heard fragments. Yes, an emergency. We need the best possible route. Thank you. When he hung up, he turned to her. That was my assistant. My lawyer is clearing his schedule to see us. Brace yourself, we might be in that office a while. Zahara nodded. She clutched her purse tighter, feeling the weight of the ring still on her finger. A ring that wasn't just a trinket, but a symbol of a marriage that was dangerously real. In her chest, her heart thudded with apprehension, and maybe just a flicker of curiosity. Part of her wondered about the man sitting beside her, about the chain of events that led them here, about what might happen if the courts refused them an easy out. For now, though, those questions would have to wait. Her future, and Tade's, rested in the hands of the law firm waiting at the end of their journey. And while Lagos churned in its ceaseless hustle around them, Zahara realized that her life had, in one fateful night, twisted onto a road she never imagined traveling. A part of her dreaded it, But another part, as small as it was, couldn't help but be intrigued by how quickly life could shift in the blink of an eye. By the time Zahara and Tade arrived at the lavish office building of Oyewole and Associates, the scorching mid-afternoon sun had softened to an orange glow. The imposing glass facade of the structure mirrored the pulsating heart of Victoria Island, elegant skyscrapers, relentless traffic, and the promise of modern success. Everything about the law firm exuded wealth and influence. From the meticulously landscaped entry to the polished marble floor in the lobby, it was clear that only clients with deep pockets frequented this establishment. A receptionist escorted them to a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The silent hum of the air conditioning soothed Zahara's frayed nerves, though she still felt out of place in these high-end surroundings. Tade, on the other hand, seemed to flow seamlessly into the environment, greeting various staffers with polite nods and exuding the controlled confidence of someone who had done business here countless times. Barely 5 minutes later, a middle-aged man with sharp features and spectacles perched on a distinguished nose entered. His graying hair was combed back, and he wore a perfectly tailored suit. He extended his hand to Tade. "Mr. Okonjo, I came as soon as I heard. It's been a while." Then he turned to Zahara, giving her a polite bow. "I'm Barrister Babalola. You must be Mrs. Okonjo." Zahara's spine stiffened at the title, but she mustered a cordial response. "Just call me Zahara, please." "Thank you for meeting with us." Barrister Babalola smiled kindly. "Of course. Let's sit." He gestured to the sleek conference table, where plush leather chairs awaited. Once they were all seated, Tade wasted no time. "We need to find out how to dissolve a marriage under these circumstances," he began. "Or at least determine if there are any immediate steps to remove the legal ties. We were intoxicated, and the entire thing was a mistake." Babalola tapped a pen against his notepad, leaning forward. "I've seen the documents your assistant sent me. Everything was duly signed and registered. According to Nigerian law, for a marriage to be voidable, there must be a valid reason, fraud, incapacity, or the inability of one or both parties to understand the implications of the marriage. Intoxication can be argued, but only if it's proven you were too impaired to consent. The burden of proof might be quite high." Zahara's anxiety flared. "But there's CCTV, right? It might show we were clearly under the influence. Everyone at the club can testify we were drinking." Barrister Babalola nodded sympathetically. "That might help, but it's not a simple open and shut case. Courts can be skeptical if there's a signed certificate with witnesses. We'll need substantial evidence that you both lacked the capacity to make rational decisions. Also, you have to factor in the formalities. Did the officiant read you your vows properly? Did they ask for consent? Was there any indication of force? The court will look at all these elements." He paused. "And even if we can establish grounds for an annulment, it might take some time." Zahara and Tade exchanged dismayed looks. Tade's phone buzzed again, but he silenced it with an irritated swipe. "Time isn't on our side," he said, voice taut. "We need a resolution as quickly and quietly as possible." Babalola raised an eyebrow. "Quickly and quietly can be tricky, especially with your public profile, Mr. Okonjo. If the press sniffs this out, it might become a public spectacle. Even if you file a case discreetly, court records can be accessed or leaked. My advice is to handle this carefully, and we'll do our utmost to push for a swift ruling." "That's all we can ask," Tade muttered. His gaze flicked to Zahara. "We should contact our families, at least." Zahara bristled at the thought. Her mother was a devoutly traditional woman who had prayed every night for Zahara to find a good husband, settle down, and build a family. To bring her mother news of a drunken, accidental marriage would be unimaginable. "I'm not telling my mother a thing," Zahara said softly but firmly, "until we're sure of the next steps. It would break her heart to get excited over something that isn't even real." Tade looked conflicted, but he eventually nodded. "I suppose that's wise. My parents are abroad at the moment. My father's a diplomat, you know, but they'll find out eventually if this goes public. Let's try to keep it under wraps for now." Barrister Babalola stood, closing his leather-bound notepad. "That's all I have at the moment. I'll proceed with preliminary filings and gather evidence to support the annulment. You should gather statements from your friends who witnessed the event. I'll also subpoena CCTV footage from the Flamingo Club. Let's keep communication lines open. Zahara muttered her thanks, while Tade shook the lawyer's hand firmly. 10 minutes later, they were back in Tade's SUV, inching through the early evening traffic. The short drive to Tade's penthouse in Ikoyi felt interminable with the gridlock. Zahara toyed nervously with the ring on her finger. By now, her eyes had become so accustomed to seeing that metallic band that she felt both repelled by it and oddly tethered to its significance. At last, they arrived at a gated high-rise overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. The security guard saluted Tade respectfully, waving them through. The mirrored lobby was all polished marble and gold accents, with an escalator leading to a private elevator. Tade swiped a keycard, and they entered the elevator that soared to the top floors. Zahara's stomach fluttered with anxiety. She felt awkward about returning to Tade's home, but where else could she go at this hour with the predicament they were in? The elevator opened directly into a vast living space, lined with glass walls that showcased the glittering skyline. The furniture was sleek, modern, and arranged to capitalize on the panoramic views. Despite its opulence, the apartment felt curiously void of personal warmth, like a showroom rather than a real home. Tade gestured towards the kitchen island. "Are you hungry? My housekeeper left some prepared meals in the fridge." "I'm not really hungry," Zahara replied. But her stomach rumbled in betrayal. She sighed. "I'll just have something light." Tade nodded and moved to the kitchen. Zahara could barely believe she was about to have dinner with a man who was legally her husband, though they were practically strangers. She lingered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city lights. The lagoon shimmered under moonlight, while the traffic far below looked like streams of red and white ants. Everything about this scenario felt surreal. A small memory from last night returned. A fleeting flash of Tade smiling at her as they toasted with shots of tequila. She recalled how he'd pulled her onto the dance floor, how she'd laughed so hard at some joke he told. There had been a certain electricity in the air, a sense that they were united in that moment by pure, unadulterated fun. The memory made her pulse quicken. Could I have actually felt something for this man, even briefly? Her reflection in the glass window showed her wearing casual jeans and a blouse Tade's housekeeper had brought for her from a nearby boutique that morning. She hardly looked like a newlywed bride. The wedding ring glinted, pulling her gaze. She wondered if Tade was experiencing a similar whirlwind of confused feelings. Was he remembering the night with some small measure of fondness or only regret? He returned from the kitchen with 2 plates of jollof rice and grilled chicken, garnished with fried plantains on the side. The aroma tickled Zahara's nose, prompting her stomach to grumble again. Tade set the plates on the glass dining table, nodding for her to join him. They ate in near silence, the tension palpable. Finally, Tade cleared his throat. "We should talk about living arrangements," he ventured, not meeting her eyes. "I understand this is weird for you, but this is also weird for me. The press, my board members, people might notice if we're living apart immediately after marriage. It could raise suspicion." Zahara cocked her head. "So, you suggest we live together? That would be quite a step, considering we only just met." He rubbed his forehead. "I know. But maybe you could stay here temporarily, at least until we figure out how to handle this. It'll be easier for my PR team to say we're simply married if you're actually on the premises. If we're seeking an annulment, we can keep it under wraps longer if we appear normal on the outside." She clenched her fork, feeling a mix of annoyance and reluctance. "Tade, I have a small apartment near Suralere. It's not glamorous, but it's home. I have some personal items there. I can't just abandon my place." Of course," he said quickly. "You can keep your apartment, but think about the immediate damage control. Besides, it might be safer for you here. If the media catches wind of this, they might harass you at your place. Paparazzi or gossip bloggers might show up. At least here, there's tight security." Zahara swallowed a bite of chicken, pondering the truth in his words. She had heard horror stories of how tabloids and online blogs in Lagos could blow up a scandal. The last thing she needed was an onslaught of cameras in her face every time she stepped outside. "Let me think about it," she said softly. "I'm not thrilled about the idea, But I do see your point. He nodded, relieved. I'll ask my driver to take you home to pack some essentials tomorrow, if that's what you decide. I'm not trying to coerce you. Just, it might be the best temporary solution. Dinner proceeded in awkward quiet, but not the hostile kind. Rather the kind where both parties were weighed down by an unspoken need to sort out a conundrum. When they were done, Tade collected the plates. Zahara mumbled a polite thanks and retreated to the living room sofa. The city lights sparkled in the distance, giving the apartment a strangely romantic glow. Zahara couldn't help but reflect on the irony. She had always dreamed of a comfortable life, possibly with a loving husband and a stable home. She had that now in some twisted sense, but it was all wrong. She didn't love Tade. She barely knew him beyond his public persona. And yet, the ring on her finger was real, the legal papers were real, and they were stuck for the foreseeable future. Her phone buzzed again, Tenny's name flashing on the cracked screen. Zahara hesitated, then decided to answer. "Tenny, you have some explaining to do," she said in a hushed tone, stepping out onto the small balcony to avoid Tade overhearing her frustration. Tenny's voice was frantic on the other end. I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to start. I thought it was a joke at first. You and Tade seemed so happy, so sure. I kept asking if you were serious, and you both insisted you were. You said you'd found your soulmate." Zahara closed her eyes, absorbing the words with a sinking heart. "I said that? I don't remember anything." "You did," Tenny replied softly. "Maybe we all had too much to drink, but you both were so convinced." "And Tade's friend Obinna?" He just kept nodding along, signing wherever it was needed. "I'm really sorry. I was too drunk myself to think straight." Zahara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, whispering, "It's okay, Tenny. Let's just fix this. I'll call you tomorrow with the details. Just be ready to be a witness if the lawyer needs you." As she ended the call, Zahara gazed at the luminous cityscape beyond the balcony. A swirl of grief and confusion tightened in her chest. She wanted nothing more than to rewind time, to make different choices. But life had a way of forging ahead with unstoppable momentum. For now, all she could do was brace herself for the next day's challenges, living in a penthouse with a man who was her husband only in name, and in a drunken piece of paper they had signed the night before. Morning sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows, casting long beams of light across the marble floors. Zahara stood at the glass panel overlooking Ikoyi's bustling streets below. The previous evening had been a whirlwind of new revelations and phone calls, of Tenny apologizing repeatedly, and of Tade's quiet attempts to alleviate the awkward tension between them. Now, she braced herself for yet another complicated day, hoping to retrieve her belongings from Surelier and figure out a way forward. She turned to see Tade approach, dressed in a sharp navy suit that highlighted his tall frame. He carried a laptop bag and some folders, evidence of a busy CEO's life. She half expected him to simply dash off to the office without a word, but he halted a few feet away, regarding her with concern. "Morning," he said gently. "I hope you slept all right." Zahara forced a polite smile. "As well as I could, under the circumstances." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I have a full day ahead at Crescent Technologies. But I've asked my driver to take you to your apartment whenever you're ready. My schedule is packed, but please text me if you need anything." His phone chirped, no doubt a reminder or another urgent email, and Zahara noticed a flicker of annoyance on his face, though she couldn't tell if it was from the phone or from the predicament they were stuck in. "Thank you," Zahara replied softly. She hesitated, catching Tade's gaze. "Will you be all right dealing with the press? I mean, it's only a matter of time before rumors start flying." He shrugged, carefully measured. "I've alerted my PR team that if any questions arise, we'll simply confirm that I'm taking personal time. Nothing more. They're good at deflecting. If push comes to shove and we can't keep it under wraps, we'll address it with a statement." His calm, methodical approach to the fiasco struck Zahara as both reassuring and unnerving. Was he so used to navigating big issues that this was just another business puzzle to solve? She felt a pang of envy at his composure. For her, this was an emotional earthquake. For him, it appeared more like a PR crisis. She managed a short nod, and within minutes, Tade was gone, leaving her alone in the penthouse with her swirling thoughts. The morning passed in a slow, tense blur. Zahara found herself pacing the luxurious living room, half watching the local news channels for any hint of a scandal. None surfaced. Eventually, the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Beezy, informed her that the driver was ready downstairs. Zahara mustered a polite thank you, grabbed her purse, and headed out, determined to face her own space and the reality of her personal life. Suralire felt like a different world entirely, familiar, noisy, and comforting in its everyday chaos. Children played football in the streets, vendors hawked their wares, and the sense of street food mingled with the city's usual hustle. Zahara's modest apartment was on the second floor of a small complex with peeling paint and narrow corridors. She unlocked the door, stepping into the living room that bore the cozy, personal touches she loved: a bright Kent print throw pillow, a bookshelf crammed with novels and Yoruba poetry collections, and framed photos of family and friends. But any relief she felt was short-lived. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number: "We know about you and Tade. Spill the beans or we go public." Accompanying it was a grainy photo of her and Tade from last night's CCTV stills at the Flamingo Club. Her stomach dropped in alarm. So the press, or some blog, had already gotten wind of it. The message didn't specify a demand for money, but the threat was clear. They wanted a story, or they'd publish something. Her fingers trembled as she called Tade, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent him a text, attaching the screenshot. "We have a leak, I need to see you ASAP." She flopped onto the worn sofa, burying her face in her hands. Her life had transformed overnight into a tabloid target. She quickly stuffed a suitcase with essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. The ring on her finger glistened every time she moved her hand, a painful reminder of her new reality. 2 hours later, Tade's driver returned, looking slightly tense as he escorted her and her suitcase back to the SUV. The drive to Crescent Technologies was long, crawling through congested streets. Zahara recognized the building immediately, an impressive modern structure with reflective glass panels and bold signage that spelled out the company's name. The driver dropped her at the front entrance, where a neatly dressed receptionist guided her to the executive floor. It was not the kind of place Zahara would have dared enter under normal circumstances. She had dreamed of working at a reputable company like Crescent Technologies, but never imagined she'd be ascending to the top floor to see the CEO under these bizarre conditions. Employees cast curious glances her way as she hurried to Tade's office. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the immediate crisis at hand. Tade's office was a corner suite with a sleek glass wall overlooking a panoramic view of Lagos. Inside, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held volumes on tech innovations, African business, and global economics. Tade stood behind a minimalist, glossy black desk, phone pressed to his ear. He motioned for Zahara to come in and closed the door behind her. "Yes, see if you can trace the origin of that number," Tade was saying, his voice edged with tension. "I need to know who's behind the threat, today if possible. Thanks, fund me." He ended the call, setting the phone down with a grim expression. "So you received that text too?" Zahara nodded, nerves raw. "Yes. Whoever it is wants an exclusive. Or they're threatening to break the news." Tade exhaled, scrubbing a hand across his face. "My PR team is on it. They're making discreet inquiries. We suspect it might be some paparazzi who paid a staff member at the Flamingo Club for the footage. Typical. They'll want either a big payday or some sensational story." Zahara swallowed hard. "What do we do?" He circled around the desk, rolling his shoulders as though the weight of the world pressed on them. "We have two choices: give them a statement or let them release the story and handle the fallout. If we do the former, we might control the narrative, but that means publicly acknowledging our marriage. If we do the latter, we risk a messy scandal with half-truths and speculation." She sank into a chair, mind whirling. "So we come out and say we're happily married? That's quite a stretch. We aren't even sure what's going to happen next." Tade let out a frustrated breath. "We wouldn't have to lie about everything. We just confirm that we got married and ask for privacy. Not too many details. Let the hype die down, then quietly file for an annulment. People will move on to the next big story soon enough. It's a pattern in the media. Zahara's jaw tightened. Are you sure we can just wave this off? I'm not used to this kind of publicity. My neighbors, my family, my future employers, once it's out there, I can't hide from it. He perched on the edge of the desk, arms folded. I get it. Believe me, I do. But if we don't address it, the blogs will fill in the gaps themselves, and it'll be worse. Rumors about how you trapped me for money, or that I manipulated you. The story will blow up. She winced, recalling the viciousness of online gossip. All right, then let's do it. Let's release a statement. Relief flickered across Tade's face, though it was tinged with regret. I'll coordinate with my PR team. We'll keep it minimal. We just confirm the marriage, say we're both professionals who value our privacy, and that's that. He paused, catching the uncertain look on Zahara's face. You'll get through this, Zahara. We both will. She lifted her eyes to him, noticing for the first time how the stress lines around his eyes had deepened. For all his wealth and power, Tade Okonjo was clearly no fan of scandal. His image was carefully curated, and this entire fiasco threatened to crumble it. A surge of sympathy rose within her, despite her frustration. Let's hope so, she said quietly. But about living together? I guess I'm staying at your penthouse for now. I packed my essentials. He nodded. It's the safest option until we figure out the next steps. There's plenty of room, so you won't have to see me if you don't want to. I'm usually gone from early morning until late evening anyway. They fell into a charged silence, both trying to process a situation that was too large for words. Zahara stared at the skyline from the wide glass window, her mind drifting to the swirl of events that had brought her here. A drunken night at the Flamingo Club, an impulsive wedding, a relentless press. It felt as though her carefully planned life had derailed in spectacular fashion, leaving her scrambling to pick up the pieces. Zahara, Tade said softly, catching her attention. She turned to face him, and he looked almost vulnerable for a moment. I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I am. This is not what either of us planned. But we'll handle it as best we can. She swallowed a lump in her throat. I'm sorry too. For everything. Maybe some part of me was looking for an escape that night. I've been stressed about job hunting, about family expectations. I can't fully blame the alcohol. We must have had some reason to do this. His lips curved in a sad half-smile. Whatever reason, it's done now. He cleared his throat and straightened his posture. Let's go see the PR team. They're waiting upstairs. She followed him out of the office, her heart pounding. This was her new reality, forging a public front as the accidental wife of one of Africa's most prominent young CEOs. The weight of that knowledge made every step feel heavier. As they walked, she recalled the carefree sparkle in his eyes the night before. They might have shared fleeting laughter and a sense of camaraderie, but reality had come crashing down with a vengeance. There was no going back, only forward into the unknown, with the entire city, and possibly the entire continent, watching. By the next morning, news of the marriage had already broken, but in a contained manner, or so Tade's PR team insisted. A brief press statement had been released late the previous evening. Mr. Tade Okonjo and Ms. Zahara James are delighted to confirm their recent marriage. Both are private individuals and request that the media respect their space during this time. There will be no further comments. The blogosphere, however, was buzzing with speculation. Words like secret romance, Cinderella story, power couple, and even sudden scandal swirled in countless articles. Predictably, a few conspiratorial voices claimed Zahara orchestrated the marriage to trap Tade. Others painted Tade as a cunning businessman who'd married a nobody for undisclosed strategic reasons. The truth, that they had married by accident while drunk, would likely never cross most gossip mongers' minds. Zahara grimaced at the swirl of news as she stood by the penthouse window, phone in hand. She had scrolled through dozens of articles, each more sensational than the last. She felt a pit in her stomach at the invasive nature of it all. Her privacy was compromised in ways she never imagined. Meanwhile, Tade was already gone to an early board meeting, leaving behind a short text, "We'll sort this out. Stay strong." She tried to find a glimmer of solace in the plush penthouse surroundings, yet the space felt coldly impersonal. Opulent, yes, but not comforting. Back in her Surulere flat, she had grown used to the cramped living quarters, the familiar hum of neighbors, and the faint aroma of fried akara in the mornings. Here, everything was swathed in a veneer of unattainable luxury, from the designer couches to the art pieces on the wall, an environment that served more as a status symbol than a home. Her restless thoughts were interrupted by Bizi, the housekeeper, who quietly handed Zahara a mug of herbal tea. "Good morning, madam. I prepared some akara and pap if you'd like breakfast." The word, madam, felt strangely jarring, but Zahara gave Bizi a grateful smile. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She set her phone aside, following Bizi to the chic dining area. True to her word, Bizi had laid out crispy akara balls and hot pap, a nod to the local breakfast staple. Zahara took a seat, inhaling the comforting aromas. For a moment, she almost felt at ease, until her phone chirped again, a series of messages from Tenny, checking up on her. She glanced but decided she'd respond after breakfast. She couldn't handle more news right this moment. As she sipped pap, her mind drifted to the conversation she needed to have with her mother. She had postponed it under the guise of sorting things out first, but now the story was out. The older woman would inevitably hear it through the grapevine. The mere thought of that conversation twisted Zahara's stomach into knots. Her mother would be ecstatic over the marriage, only to be crushed when she learned it was a fiasco. Zahara needed a plan, a script, anything to soften the blow. She finished her meal with a heavy heart, then retreated to the penthouse study. It was smaller than the main living areas but lined with books on African leadership, technology, and global entrepreneurship. The large desk in the center was made of rich hardwood, cluttered with Tade's papers and a sleek laptop. Zahara retrieved her own phone, propping it against a stack of books while she prepared for the dreaded video call. After a few tense rings, her mother's face appeared on the screen. "Zahara!" her mother exclaimed, eyes wide behind reading glasses. She was wearing a traditional Ankara wrapper and a matching headscarf. Zahara could see the patterned curtains of the family home behind her. "My daughter, how are you? I've been hearing rumors. You married Tade Okonjo. Why didn't you call me?" Zahara swallowed, forcing a smile. "Mummy, calm down please. It's a complicated situation. I was going to tell you. It happened so fast, and we wanted to handle it privately first." Her mother's face lit up with a broad smile. "And so it's true? You're finally married? Thank God. I've been praying for this day. Tade Okonjo is a fine man, and so successful. When can I meet him?" "Oh, your aunties will be so happy." A pang of guilt struck Zahara. She couldn't bring herself to deflate her mother's excitement completely. "Mummy, yes, we're legally married. But it was quite sudden, and Tade and I are still figuring things out." I know. Marriage can be sudden sometimes. But it's a blessing, my dear." She clapped her hands together in delight. "I must call your father. He's been traveling, but he'll be overjoyed." "Zahara, this is wonderful news. Let me know when you two can come down to Port Harcourt so we can do a proper introduction." Zahara's cheeks warmed. "Yes, we'll see about that soon," she lied, her heart aching. "I have to go, Mummy. We'll talk later, all right?" Her mother nodded, eyes shining. "Take care, my dear. Congratulate Tade for me. Tell him he's most welcome in this family." When the call ended, Zahara stared at the blank screen, feeling numb. There it was, her mother's unconditional joy. The knowledge that she would have to eventually reveal the truth weighed on her like a lead cloak. She pressed her hands to her face, inhaling slowly. Maybe, just maybe, if the annulment took longer than expected, she could keep her mother temporarily happy. But deep down, she suspected that the heartbreak in store would be severe. She couldn't dwell on it too long, though, because the phone rang again. This time, it was Tade's number. She answered swiftly. "Hey, Zahara, can you come to my office?" Tade asked. He sounded more composed than before, but his words had a clipped urgency. "There's been a new development." She tensed. "Sure. Right away." An hour later, Zahara was once again in the executive floor corridor at Crescent Technologies. This time, A different energy pulsed through the place. Employees moved with a sense of anticipation, their eyes flicking her way. She felt self-conscious, suspecting that everyone had read the rumors by now. She even caught a pair of junior staffers whispering behind their hands as she passed, trying, unsuccessfully, to appear inconspicuous. Tade's assistant, a polished young woman named Funmi, guided Zahara into a conference room. Tade and Barrister Babalola were already seated, along with another impeccably dressed man Zahara assumed was part of Tade's PR or legal team. The atmosphere crackled with intensity. "I asked Barrister Babalola to update us," Tade began, once she sat down. "He's spoken to the relevant court officials." "Go ahead, Barrister." Babalola folded his hands on the table, shooting Zahara a sympathetic glance. "I've made some preliminary motions to annul the marriage on grounds of intoxication and lack of mental capacity. However, I've learned there's a backlog of similar petitions, and the earliest we can get a hearing is in 3 months. Zahara's eyebrows shot up. 3 months? Babalola nodded solemnly. Yes. And that's assuming the judge doesn't postpone or combine cases. There's a chance it could extend further, up to 6 months or more. The room fell silent. Zahara's thoughts raced. 6 months, living this lie, dealing with the press, her mother's expectations, Tade's corporate image? Anxiety clawed at her chest. She turned to Tade. "What does this mean for us right now?" Tade leaned back in his chair, wearing the expression of a man backed into a corner. "We remain married for the foreseeable future, in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the public. I have to maintain the facade that we're a legitimate couple, or the rumors will snowball into something unmanageable." Zahara clenched her jaw. "A facade? Great." The other man at the table, whom Tade introduced as Emmanuel from the PR department, smoothed out his tie. "We'll craft a narrative. A whirlwind romance that caught everyone by surprise. You'll both occasionally appear together at events or gatherings, just to quell speculation. But we won't feed the tabloids personal details. Eventually, people will grow bored." Zahara's stomach churned at the suggestion. She had never sought the spotlight, but now she was thrust onto a stage of forced appearances. Tade nodded grimly. "Emmanuel is right. We need to show face. Not too often, but enough to be credible. It's the only way to reduce the gossip to a dull roar." Barrister Babalola shrugged apologetically. "Until the annulment is finalized, you two are, for all intents and purposes, husband and wife." Zahara swallowed, her throat painfully dry. She was silent for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Then she took a steadying breath, summoning her resolve. "All right, then we do this. But only until the annulment. And after that, we each go our separate ways." Tade's eyes flicked toward her, revealing a mixture of relief and regret. "Exactly. We'll handle this professionally." Within an hour, the meeting concluded, leaving Zahara feeling like she'd signed up for an elaborate stage play. Emmanuel led her to a corner of the room to discuss potential public events, tech summits, charity galas, or even a few casual dinner photos with close business associates. The entire concept felt surreal, but she nodded along, battling the impulse to run. Soon enough, Tade and Zahara were left alone in his office, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Tade glanced at the door, ensuring no one was nearby, then turned to her. "I know this is a lot to handle. I can't thank you enough for going along with this. I promise I'll do everything in my power to make it as painless as possible." She studied him for a moment. "Just remember, this is not what I wanted. I still can't believe we're stuck like this for months." His voice softened. "Neither can I." The moment stretched between them, heavy with reluctant solidarity. They were two strangers, bound by an inexplicable twist of fate. Zahara wondered, not for the first time, what had possessed them during that drunken night to make such a life-altering decision. Was there a spark of genuine chemistry, or had it all been an illusory bond forged in the haze of alcohol and good music? She cleared her throat, glancing at the city skyline through Tade's floor-to-ceiling window. "I guess we should start by scheduling an appearance or two, so it seems believable." He nodded, his gaze following hers to the busy streets below. "We'll do what we must, Zahara." And so, The stage was set for a performance neither of them had auditioned for. They'd put on the semblance of a blissful union, balancing on the tightrope of media scrutiny. And all the while, they'd await the day a court would finally sever their unexpected bond. Yet, an unspoken question lingered in the air between them. Would 6 months be enough time for them to remain unaffected by each other? Or would this forced proximity lead them down an even more complicated road? Weeks melted into a pattern that felt both surreal and strangely normalized. Zahara found herself absorbing the rhythms of Tade's penthouse life, waking up to the city's skyline, sipping coffee while scanning the morning headlines about their surprise union, and occasionally accompanying him to high-profile events. If this were a Nollywood script, Zahara mused, it might be titled The Accidental Couple. Except she was living it every day, a reluctant actress in a drama that had no immediate end. She was surprised by the subtle ways in which Tade's presence infiltrated her routine. Despite his sometimes aloof nature, he showed consideration, leaving post-it notes about groceries she liked, making sure Beezy prepared her favorite local dishes, occasionally driving her to the law firm for updates on the annulment process. He was busy, yes, but he wasn't absent in her life. And that, paradoxically, made their arrangement both easier and more complicated. On her end, Zahara tried to maintain a semblance of autonomy. She had continued her job search, leveraging connections she'd made back in Suralere. However, her marital status made some potential employers wary or overly curious. In a few interviews, prospective bosses would slyly inquire about Hertz's famous husband, as though that aspect overshadowed her qualifications. She left those interviews with a bitter taste in her mouth, determined not to let Tade's identity define her. Finally, she secured a temporary contract doing online editorial work for a small media company, which allowed her to work from home being Tade's penthouse, at least for now. One Saturday evening, a month into their forced cohabitation, Tade invited Zahara to a charity gala. Proceeds were going toward building tech labs in underprivileged neighborhoods across Lagos, a cause Tade's company supported. Normally, Zahara would have dreaded such an event, but Emmanuel, the PR specialist, insisted it was the perfect opportunity to maintain the public illusion. Thus, Zahara found herself in a stylish African print evening gown, hair expertly styled in a contemporary updo. She stood before a mirror in the penthouse guest bedroom, adjusting a gold necklace Tade had gifted her that morning. Purely for the sake of appearances, he'd said. Yet Zahara couldn't help but feel a tad self-conscious, noticing how the vibrant patterns of the fabric complemented her dark skin and accentuated her figure. She walked into the living room to find Tade waiting. He wore a well-tailored tux, but added a twist, a bold encre pocket square that matched Zahara's gown. He froze when he saw her, eyes flicking over her form in open admiration. "You look amazing." A sudden warmth spread across Zahara's cheeks. "Thank you. You're not bad yourself." A silent moment passed, charged with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Then Tade cleared his throat and offered her his arm. "Shall we?" The gala, held in the sprawling ballroom of a luxury hotel, buzzed with influential figures from across the country: politicians, entrepreneurs, tech gurus, and celebrities. Photographers hovered near the entrance, capturing every arrival. When Tade and Zahara stepped onto the red carpet, camera flashes erupted in a frenzy. She instinctively moved closer to him, her hand tight around his arm, and he steadied her with a reassuring grip. They posed for a few photos, Zahara's heart beating wildly as she forced a smile, then moved inside to the elegantly decorated hall. The event featured vibrant displays of art, a live band playing high-life music, and gourmet canapés served by waiters in crisp uniforms. Over dinner, they were joined at their table by a collection of business moguls and philanthropic leaders. Zahara managed polite conversation, although her mind kept drifting to the surreal notion that she was here as Mrs. Okonjo, a title she wore only for a predetermined time. Throughout the evening, Tade made sure to keep her engaged. He introduced her to various contacts, gently guided her into conversations about her editorial work, and never let her feel overshadowed. To onlookers, they might have appeared every inch the power couple. Him, the driven Sith, and her, the supportive wife with grace and poise. Zahara found herself momentarily lulled by the pleasant facade they were presenting. It felt like a well-rehearsed dance. Yet, as the night wore on, the heaviness of their charade pressed against Zahara's chest. She excused herself to step onto the hotel's terrace for fresh air. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and a soft breeze whispered through the palm trees lining the patio. She leaned on the railing, taking deep breaths. "What am I doing here?" A moment later, Tade joined her, gently placing a hand on the small of her back. "You okay?" She nodded, gazing at the horizon. "I am. Sometimes I forget that this is all temporary." He tilted his head. "Does it feel that way?" She shrugged, turning to face him. "At times, it feels like we've known each other for ages. We chat, we coordinate schedules, we laugh at silly inside jokes, we share silent meals. We act like a real couple. And then I remember we're waiting for that annulment hearing, and it's like a bucket of cold water over my head." Tade nodded, his eyes troubled. "I know exactly what you mean. It's strange. Part of me feels like I'm living a life that should have taken years to build, yet it came out of nowhere, and might end just as fast." Her heart pounded, an unexpected ache winding its way through her chest. She realized she'd grown comfortable in his presence. She valued his quiet thoughtfulness, his intense focus, and even the gentle teasing moments they shared over breakfast. She hadn't counted on forging any kind of genuine bond with him, but it was happening nonetheless. "Zahara," Tade began, stepping closer. The sounds of the gala faded behind them. "This might sound insane, but I'm grateful we've been able to make this workable. You could have just as easily hated me. But you've shown patience and kindness." She looked up at him, her pulse racing. For a moment, his dark eyes betrayed a vulnerability she'd never seen in all the magazine photos or business interviews. "It's not your fault this happened," she whispered. "We both made a mistake. We're just dealing with it. If we have to do this for a few more months, we might as well not make it harder than it already is." He swallowed, gaze flicking to her lips before meeting her eyes again. She felt a shiver race down her spine. Was he about to kiss her? And did she want him to? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. But after a moment, Tade stepped back, tucking his hands into his pockets as if reining himself in. "We should go back in. The auction's starting soon." Zahara nodded, breath unsteady. "Yes. Let's go." They rejoined the gala, taking their seats just in time for the night's highlights, a charity auction featuring paintings, tech gadgets, and VIP experiences. Tade bid generously on several items, his philanthropic flair impressing the crowd. Zahara cheered him on, playing the role of supportive wife, but her mind couldn't dispel the lingering electricity from that intimate moment on the terrace. In the car ride home, they were both subdued, exchanging only glances and small talk about the evening's success. When they arrived at the penthouse, Tade walked Zahara to her bedroom door. She paused before entering, swallowing the knot in her throat. "Good night, Tade." "Good night, Zahara," he replied softly, lingering in the hallway a second longer than necessary. Then he turned and left. Alone in her room, Zahara peeled off her gown, changed into comfortable shorts, and stood by the window, gazing out at the city below. Her reflection merged with the glowing skyline, and she wondered about the thin line between pretense and reality. Could something real develop from such an accidental start? Was it possible that fate had tossed them together for a reason? Weeks stretched into another month, and the routine of their lives deepened. Though they maintained separate spaces, occasionally they'd fall into an easy camaraderie, taking a walk together on a rare free Sunday, or discussing an editorial piece Zahara was working on. They discovered mutual tastes in local music, debated the best suya spots in Lagos, and teased each other about small habits, like Tade's incessant phone checking or Zahara's tendency to binge-watch Nollywood dramas late into the night. Bit by bit, the concept of an arrangement blurred. They were married, at least on paper, and day by day, it felt less like a forced charade and more like an unexpected companionship. Then, one afternoon, as Zahara was absorbed in editing an article at the dining table, Tade received a phone call from Barrister Babalola. Zahara watched Tade's face carefully. His expression shifted from neutral to stunned. He ended the call, placing the phone down with a measured exhale. "What is it?" Zahara asked, standing up. Tade locked eyes with her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The hearing date. It's in 2 weeks. They managed to expedite our petition. Someone else withdrew, so our case slot opened up sooner. A flurry of emotions bombarded her. Relief, because the messy ordeal might finally end soon. Fear, because the life she'd grown used to was on the brink of another upheaval. And something else she couldn't quite name, a pang that felt suspiciously like regret. That's great, she managed, forcing a smile. Tade nodded, searching her face. Yeah, great. They stood there, the mood in the penthouse thick with questions unspoken. Finally, Zahara cleared her throat. So, in 2 weeks, we'll be free to go our separate ways? Yes, Tade said, though the usual decisiveness in his tone had waned. We'll be free. She swallowed, feeling as though an invisible line had been drawn between them. The countdown was on. Their accidental union, which had begun in chaos and blossomed into a cooperative partnership, perhaps even more, was days away from ending. Instead of elation, Zahara's heart clenched with a confusing sorrow. In the days that followed, they became more guarded, as though each tried to protect themselves from an emotional blow. They engaged in minimal conversation, sticking to the necessary pleasantries. Zahara finished her editorial contract, uncertain if she should look for a new place to live or stay in the penthouse until the hearing. Tade, for his part, dived headlong into business expansions and philanthropic pursuits, rarely returning home before midnight. And so, the night before the hearing found them both seated at the dining table, a silent meal spread before them. No cameras, no staff, no forced public facade. Just two people who had once been strangers had become spouses, however inadvertently, and were now poised to become strangers again. Or perhaps something else entirely. Zahara set down her fork. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Tade, tomorrow, will stand in front of the court and say it was a mistake. Her eyes flickered to the ring she still wore, almost by habit now. Was it all a mistake? He looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. It was unexpected, yes. A drunken decision. But was it a mistake? He paused, 1,000 silent emotions dancing in his eyes. I don't know anymore. In that moment, time seemed suspended. The city's nightscape glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, oblivious to their turmoil. Zahara felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She had to decide what she truly wanted. Was it release, or was it this man sitting across from her, the only one who understood the bizarre path they had walked together? Her heart was a frantic drumbeat in her chest as she searched for an answer. But before she could speak, Tade rose from his chair, crossing to her side. He gently lifted her hand, the one with the ring. His thumb brushed over the cool metal band. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, I need you to know, you've changed me, Zahara. You've shown me a different way to live. I don't want to lose that. Her breath caught. Tade. Before she could finish, he leaned in, capturing her lips in a tentative, gentle kiss that escalated the thunder in her chest to a full-on storm. The warmth of his touch, the taste of longing and quiet desperation, it all flooded her senses. She realized, with startling clarity, how much she'd grown to care for him. She kissed him back, pouring into that moment all the questions, all the hopes, all the uncertainties they battled. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. We'll figure it out, he whispered, resting his forehead against hers. One way or another. And so they would. In the swirl of modern African city life, where the hum of traffic and the beat of Afrobeats formed a soundtrack to daily hustle, two unlikely souls had collided. They had forged a bond under the strangest of circumstances, and now they stood on the threshold of yet another momentous choice. Tomorrow, the courts could free them legally, but could they willingly let go of the fragile love that had taken root? Zahara closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of Tade's cologne mixed with the lingering aroma of the half-eaten dinner. Fate, it seemed, was still dealing its cards. Perhaps they would choose the path of annulment, returning to the lives they once knew. Or perhaps, in one of life's most unexpected twists, they would find that the best mistakes are the ones that lead to something real, a bond neither had thought they wanted, but both had discovered they needed. Whatever the outcome, their story was no longer just the tale of a drunken woman waking up married to a handsome CEO. It was the tale of two people who dared to question whether accidents of fate might sometimes be the gentle nudge toward true destiny, an unplanned journey that might just become the greatest adventure of their lives. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.